All right, so this is the first presentation for Unit 3, and we're going to start with Islam. And in class, I went over, the differences between Judaism, Christianity, and Islam and what they have in common. So I'll go ahead and skip this part for now and just get right into it for the video. All right, so let's see here. Let's go ahead and, well, come on. Computer's going slow. There we go. Okay, so Islam basically starts around, you can say basically around 600 AD is when it picks up. So this unit covers 500 AD to 1500 AD. So basically as we go through, we'll cover pretty much that entire time period, and then when we get to the next topic, we'll reverse and cover the entire time period again. So all this stuff is going on at the same time. All right, so Muhammad, he's the founder of Islam, and he was born to a really rich Meccan family. They were merchants. Had gold mines and things like that. And but he was orphaned at age 6, raised by his grandfather and his uncle. He didn't finish schooling, so he didn't have that much schooling. And then at age 25, he becomes a trader, and he meets his wife, Khadijah. And she was 40 at the time. They mainly got married because it was a good business relationship. So then getting married and making some money. Then when he reaches the age of 40, he was meditating in a cave, and he said that an angel appeared to him and gave him a message. And he said it was the angel Gabriel. And Gabriel shows up in the New Testament for Christians whenever Mary finds out she's going to have Jesus. Also appears to Joseph, letting him know to take Mary and Jesus to Egypt to escape Herod, trying to kill all the baby boys and stuff like that. So he receives this prophecy, and this message is what will eventually become the Quran. And so he doesn't write it down because he doesn't know how to write, but people that he tells this message to will then write it down and become this new prophet. So just keep in mind that Muslims don't believe that. Well, first off, keep in mind that a Muslim is a follower of Islam, so it's not a ethnic group or anything like that. It's someone that follows Islam. So anyways, the Muslims, they don't believe Muhammad is, a god, or, they don't believe he's like the son of God like Christians believe about Jesus. They believe he's just a prophet, but he was the greatest of the prophets. But they do believe Jesus was a prophet, for example, and they actually believe in all the same prophets in the Old Testament as Christians and Jews. But they just have different interpretations on what God is doing and how he interacts with people and stuff like that. All right, so he began teaching that Allah was the only God. Allah is just how you say God in Arabic. It's not the name for God. It's just, if you want to say God in Arabic, you say Allah. And then, like I said, people that follow Islam are called Muslims. And then in 613, this is when he began preaching in Mecca. So this is where he was from, was Mecca. But the Meccans didn't accept him right off the bat, and mainly right here is what you need to know. In Mecca at the time, they were more so polytheistic, and that was where they made idols and sold idols and things like that for you to worship. And that was a huge part of their economy, and because people would go on pilgrimages to Mecca to get these idols and worship these different gods and things of that sort. And so if Islam came in and took that away, there goes their economy. So for financial reasons, they rejected Islam, rejected Muhammad, and he left and went throughout the Arabian Peninsula. And then after going throughout the Arabian Peninsula and finding lots of people to follow him, he really became a military leader at the same time too. So in 630, he amassed an army of 10,000 Muslims and invaded Mecca, basically to get back for him for not following him. So he goes into Mecca, and they surrender for the most part. And then at that point, Mecca actually becomes the most important city for Islam. So, they were afraid that people wouldn't come there anymore. Well, now, people do. It's one of the 5 pillars of Islam that they must go to Mecca, at least at one point in their lives. And so anyways, after this point is when he begins expanding the empire. So Islam from the very beginning starts out as a religion, but also a political empire, a way to control a society. And so Muhammad dies, but then they continue expanding and creating this large empire. So here are the 5 pillars of Islam. You do need to know these 5 pillars. You have the Shahada, which is basically meaning that you worship Allah and deny any other gods, and that, of course, Muhammad is his most important prophet. And then you have the Salah, which is prayer 5 times a day facing Mecca. And then the Zakat, which is where you give to charity and things of that sort, so giving alms to the poor. And then the Hajj, which is the pilgrimage to Mecca, at least once in your life. And then fasting, This is during the month of Ramadan, where during the day from sunrise to sunset they fast, and then they have a huge meal in the evening, and really kind of throughout the night. What's interesting is actually most Muslims end up gaining weight during Ramadan, even though they're not eating during the day, but it's just because they're gorging themselves in the evening. I mean, imagine like Thanksgiving every day for 30 days. All right, so after Muhammad dies, the next leader is Abu Bakr. And then you get, so he's basically the first caliph. The caliph is the leader of Islam. And then after that, you get 3 other elected caliphs. And these guys are called the rightly guided caliphs, meaning that they were still close to the heart of Muhammad and led in the way that he would want. But after this is where you're going to get a split coming up in a little bit within Islam. So under these 3 caliphs, the Muslim empire expands. Like I said, it's a political empire, and they have a large military, and so they are conquering people. And they conquer all of North Africa, the Middle East, and all the way over to the Indus River in India. So you're going from the Atlantic Ocean on the west side of Africa all the way to India. So this is a huge empire. So during the Middle Ages, the Muslim empire is the most advanced empire on earth. If you want to learn anything, do anything, all the major advancements out of the Middle Ages come out of the Muslim empire. They're the ones that give a huge boost to science and math and really laid the foundation for our modern society. Even the number system we use, they created. So the numbers we use on a daily basis that made math so much simpler came from the Muslims. So a lot of advancements came from them through this large empire. All right, so after the 4 rightly guided caliphs, so after Abu Bakr and the 3 caliphs after him, this is where you get to their first big problem. You have the Umayyad family takes over as a dynasty. And the Umayyad family is very materialistic, and they focus very much on their wealth. And they actually moved the capital of Islam away from Mecca to Damascus. And just kind of compare the two. Think of Mecca, like we're thinking of the Catholic Church. Think of Mecca as kind of like the Vatican in Rome. That's this holy place where the Catholic Church is situated. Now imagine if the Pope, leader of the Catholic Church, just came out and said, you know what? I don't really like this lifestyle anymore. I really want to live it up. Like, I'm going to go to Vegas. We're going to move the church to Las Vegas, right there on the Strip, and hang out there and just party and just get wasted and all that kind of stuff. And that's basically what the Umayyad family did. They moved to Damascus, which is like the Las Vegas of that time. They have huge parties, huge palaces. They're getting drunk all the time, just living it up. And this looks really poorly on, Islam. Most Muslims see this and they're really angry. And so this is going to lead to a split, a division in Islam that still exists today that you need to know. The split between Shia and Sunni. Shias are sometimes also called Shiites. So basically the split is over who should be the leader of Islam. Shia makes up today about 15% of Muslims, 15 to 20%, tend to be more fundamental, which means that they take pretty much everything the Quran says literally. And they believe that the leader of it, and this is the key part, they believe that the leader of Islam should be a descendant of Muhammad. So basically, like a dynasty that should come from his family. Whereas in the Sunni, which make up 80 to 85% of the Muslim population, tend to be the more, you could say, secular side of Islam. So, they basically take the religion, make it more personal. They don't necessarily try to push Islam onto society through the government and things like that, like you may see in Iran, for example. So a lot of the Muslims here in the United States are Sunni. And they believe that anybody that's a good leader could lead Islam. So they're not as by the book, you could say. All right. Then you get internal conflicts, basically. So you get religious and political opposition within Islam and the Umayyad Caliphate. So they end up getting destroyed and killed. Literally, they're murdered. And then the Abbasids take over and they expand and create an empire that lasts about 500 years, starting in 750. The Umayyad prince, though, they did make it over to Spain and set up a dynasty in Spain. So if you go to Spain today, you'll see a lot of Muslim influence in the architecture and food and things like that, because it was controlled by Muslims for, about 500 years or so. So the Abbasids, what they did is basically divide their empire up. And so you had a huge Muslim empire, but you had the Fatimid dynasty that controlled North Africa, and then you had the Abbasid Empire, which controlled mainly the Middle East and that area. And so but all of it is this huge Muslim empire. And then, of course, it created this huge trade network going in between Asia and Europe. And so, again, after the fall of Rome, this brings trade back again, at least to the eastern part of Europe. But this can be real important later when we get to exploration and things like that, because all the goods that come from Asia go through the Muslim empire. Then it goes to the Italians, mainly the Venetians, and they sell it to the rest of Europe. And so when we get to exploration, people are trying to figure out how to get around the Muslims, how to trade without having to go through the Muslim empire. All right, now we get to achievements. I'm probably wondering why this photo here would be under achievements, but it's because they developed medicine to help fight diseases like smallpox and measles and things like that. So the achievement was fixing that. All right, so looking at Muslim society. So Damascus and Baghdad are their two biggest cities. So that's like New York City and LA. Baghdad is really the center of all knowledge, education, things like that. So if you wanted to do anything, be anything, you would go to Baghdad, Iraq. That was pretty much the center of human civilization for a good 800 years. They had 1 million people. So again, think Roman Empire. So Rome had 1 million people, and then after the fall of Rome, it's down to 25,000. Then the next big city in Europe is Constantinople, which gets up to around 1 million people. And then at the same time as Constantinople was growing and becoming this huge city and center of civilization, so is Baghdad with 1 million people. Now, your social classes, so you need to know the difference between these. So your upper class are people who are Muslim at birth. So this is another place where Islam is different. For them, if you're born into a Muslim family, you are Muslim at birth. So it's not like Christianity or Judaism where you're born and you're just you, and then you decide later what you're going to be. And then second-class citizen is someone that converts to Islam. And then you have the third class, which is the protected people, Christians, Jews, and Zoroastrians. And these are monotheistic religions. And so they were protected in the sense that, well, since they're monotheistic, we won't, make them slaves. But there were certain things that were put on this group here that these two groups didn't have to worry about. The main thing is taxes. The whole tax burden of the entire empire landed on this class of people. So there's economic pressure to convert, because once you convert and you're a second-class citizen, you don't pay any more taxes. And also keep in mind, too, these people are going to have lower-end jobs. They're not going to be able to have higher-end jobs. And so they're going to be paid little and then taxed a lot. And then also the other pressure on this protected group is that they're not allowed to share their faith with anyone, including their own children. So the idea is that you're squashing the religion slowly but surely. But eventually the idea is that Christianity, Judaism, and Zoroastrianism would disappear. And Islam would be the ruling religion. So protected, yes, but basically it's just an indirect way to get rid of them. And then the lowest class, of course, is your slaves. These are going to be people that are polytheistic, like Hindus. And then also they started enslaving Africans. Muslims are the first group of people outside of Africa to enslave Africans. But we'll talk a lot more about that later when we get into the slave trade in the next unit. All right, and then they, of course, highly priced education, super important to them. They held on to what the Greeks and the Romans figured out, all the advancements they made, and kept them. And really, this is where we got to thank the Muslims the most, is because if they hadn't have done that, civilization would have taken a huge step backwards. And by no means we would not be where we are today if that information hadn't been kept by someone. So they held on to that. They had the House of Wisdom in Baghdad, which is a huge library and academy and translation center. Basically, this is like Google of the Middle Ages. If you want to know anything, you would go there. But they stored all of that knowledge there to be able to be passed on to future generations. And that was key to getting to where we are right now. All right, and then give you some examples of things that they were able to do. Al-Razi, he wrote an encyclopedia on medicine. It's called The Comprehensive, and that was used for a good 800 years, looking at smallpox and measles and how to treat some of those things. They also started using experimentation. So basically, they came up with a scientific method. Whereas in the Greeks and Romans really just try to use reason. They would observe and then talk about it, but they didn't actually experiment. Then Khwarizmi, he created algebra and came up with a number system we currently use, like the 0 through 9, the way we write them. And then Muslims also discovered the way light passes through our eyes and how our eyes work, and so they were able to create glasses to fix our vision. So they did that about 1,000 years ago. And the calligraphy is this ornate form of writing they do. Muslims aren't allowed to draw living beings just straight on, but they can write verses from the Quran in calligraphy and do it in the shape of like an animal or a person. And so it's this really ornate and beautiful way of writing. So a lot of the Muslim art And even in the architecture, you'll see like chiseled in calligraphy. It's really cool looking. So that is it on the Muslims. So the big idea here again is during the Middle Ages, the Muslim Empire is really the most advanced civilization on earth. They're the ones that hold on to the information from the Greeks and the Romans and keep it for us so that we were able to build onto Western civilization to where it is today. And of course, they controlled a giant area and then really were in control of trade between Asia and Europe.